All right. Thank you for joining me. I'm Sean Wilson. I'm the president of the Youth Cycling Association. And we just finished our discussion about performance programs. And this is really ages 15 to 18, as well as collegiate riders. And this is based on our needs assessment in American cycling. This is just our preliminary analysis and findings. And I would consider these working documents. So if we think about our sport, we're very diverse, which is really cool. It provides us a lot of opportunities for people to enjoy our sport. But along with that, those many facets, what we find is that a lot of these different organizations that run these different activities tend to silo themselves off from one another, and they may not communicate as well as we would like. As coaches, we believe that we can actually make a difference. We can move between the different silos and those different facets and help the athletes working in that athlete-centric space to navigate those various aspects to our sport. In this realm where we're talking about performance programs, even though we're really competition-minded, the overarching goal is really to have everybody that comes here into this space to have a joy of cycling, to have purpose, and then to master the sport. When we step back a little bit and we look at our sport in the United States, we have a couple of key objectives. First, we need to demonstrate that cycling is actually an organized sport. And this comes up against all the other sports in our nation that are much more organized, much more well organized than we are. Associated with that, we need to legitimize the sport in the eyes of our society, which is not an easy task. When we think about the kids that enter our sport, even on balance bikes, and we think about them moving through our sport through pedaling, mobility, freedom, utility, exercise, training, and competition, there has to be continuity in this process. That is something that we lack in our sport presently and something that we need to really work on. We believe as coaches that this has to be driven through curriculum that's developed across all of these different phases. And this has got to be taught not only by high-level coaches, but it has to start in the schools with teacher programs, working into instructors that can actually be young riders and mentors that work with younger kids to help them learn and grow in our sport. And then working into mentors that just help these athletes, these budding athletes, find joy in our sport, not even through competitive spaces, but just through riding. And then lastly, when they move into that competition phase, you have to have high-level coaches. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in this segment. When we're talking about athlete development, we're using the American development model as our construct, as our framework for all of our discussions for these talks. However, this may not be the best model for our sport. Today, we're going to talk about stage 4, both in terms of participating and succeeding in the sport, and then excelling for high performance, which are actually two distinct components to sport development. When we think about that first segment, and we just want the kids coming in from ADM level 3, where they're just enjoying the sport and they're training and working on goals. Our target audiences are ages 15 to 18 and U23 athletes. These are grades 9 to 12, high schoolers and collegiate level athletes. A lot of them will be crossover athletes coming from other sports. But ultimately, when they get to this competitive level, they're really those who are persisting in sport and really enjoy doing the sport. When we talk about the successes that we're looking for at this participation phase, We're looking for socialization. We want to build in leadership skills. We're going to talk more about this when we get to the next phase. They need to be able to set goals. They need to be getting aware of competition, and they need to have awareness and understanding of the pathway that they're actually in. And they need to start thinking about the training programs that they're doing and periodization. They need to become self-sufficient. They're still building life lessons through sport, much as they did in the earlier phases. Now they're actually building skill and mastery of sport. They're really working on building that engine. They're training to build themselves for the future. And they need to be exposed for a variety of different things, and they need to have empowerment. When we think about the equipment that they're using, the types of bicycles they're using are depending on the discipline. Of course, they have to have a proper bicycle fit. We're still thinking about the affordability of these programs. And there was a lot of discussion about having loaner equipment available, buying things secondhand. And then there was a secondary component where kids that are at this level are starting to become sponsored by different component companies. And they're developing an identity around that, and how that may not be entirely healthy, and that we need to make sure that the kids are just identifying with our sport. When we think about the program considerations, most of their time is actually spent racing at the local as well as the regional level, with just a little bit of time spent at the national and international levels. When we consider the types of events that they're doing, it's very diverse. As I said, most of these programs are very local, but they need to be in an ADM correct manner. And a lot of this is going to develop around the skills that they're doing, as well as the training. These need to be held in appropriate locations. And we can often use group rides as de facto race events. There was a lot of discussion around volunteerism and how that needs to be brought back to our sport. It's something that's been on the decline for a long time, and that those regional race events and even the local events, they need to be run by those local clubs, which are really the lifeblood of our sport. When we consider other possible models, we look to the National Interscholastic Cycling Association, which actually runs a race series, which is well defined and controlled. It develops their own ecosystem. And that's something that's very economical, and it's something that needs to really be considered as we move forward. We also had some discussion about using purpose-built facilities, such as speedways, and we know that there's various places around the country where this is happening now, and something that we need to really consider for the future. For many years, we've had regional camps that have been run by the local associations, USA Cycling, as well as clinics, daily clinics. Those are absolutely critical. As Pete Weber brought up, it helps develop a robust pyramid that provides leadership from our organizations that create opportunities for the kids to actually come together. And the regional camp structure, because of the way they're organized, because it's non-competitive, it actually breaks down silos that exist between different teams, and it helps bring together the community of ridership, and it helps those riders develop social skills and friendships that are going to last across their lifetimes. It's absolutely critical to the sport. The other thing that came out was there's a lot of private camps being run, a lot of these run by coaches, as well as by various large institutions that should be examined as other models for providing these types of opportunities for kids, especially when we look at the international arena. So who's actually running these programs? In the earlier stages, we talked a lot about school-based programming. The National Interscholastic Cycling Association, they really bridge between ADM 3 and ADM 4 in their activities. They both provide non-competitive and competitive opportunities, and they're run through that scholastic environment, even if they're kind of more extramural. And that's something that's very important, and it's something that we need to really consider moving forward. We had a lot of discussion about the differences between local cycling clubs, which is really grassroots development efforts that bring those kids up through ADM 2 and 3 into ADM 4, as well as local cycling teams, which are going to have a much different structure and composition, and they need to be treated differently. Collegiate cycling clubs, collegiate teams, they need to be examined as well. They're running these programs. But you can also have the local associations and the national governing bodies involved in these types of programming. The other thing to consider are things like velodromes and other facility-based programs where they actually have resident coaches that run activities. And those are very important. They bring the kids together, and they can do it in a very productive way that builds them for the future. And then we can't forget about the private coaches that are actually running a lot of these skills camps, clinics, things of that nature, as well as running their own programs. A lot of them are hired by the clubs and teams to actually assist and drive programs forward. Again, we come back to that idea that we need to have a robust pyramid that provides us adequate leadership to create those opportunities to bring the kids together. Absolutely critical. When we think about the coaches that are running these things, we had a lot of discussion about that. In ADM 3, we talked a lot about the coaches being just relevant and knowledgeable in the sport, but now we're actually talking about a lot of specialization in the coaching activities for the various opportunities that the kids are coming into. We need to be inclusive of the diversity in the coaching framework to match the athletes that we're bringing into the program. When we think about the coaching toolkit, we need best practices. The best thing we have right now is the information that's been developed through NICA, but realistically, we need to develop our own best practices that are really going to carry us forward into the future, especially given the diversity and opportunities involved in our sport. When we think about training regimes and periodization, we always seem to come back to the idea that kids are not small adults, but you really have to think about that these kids now are going through puberty. They're moving forward, some of them at a very rapid rate, so you cannot underestimate their capacity. You really have to let the events that they're doing guide the training regimes. And you have to let the athletes rise to that occasion so that they can actually not only be competitive, but they can actually succeed at the tasks that they're doing. Ultimately, these can still be club or mentored coaches, and the activities really need to be closely monitored so you can ensure that they're developing the appropriate skills and training habits that we want to see in lifetime athletes. We had a lot of discussion about costs. Boulder Junior Cycling provided some information regarding their session costs and what it costs over the season. But we really need to look in this in more depth so that we can actually provide clarity to parents that are bringing kids into this level so that they're not shell-shocked by the costs associated with the programs, because they are going to be quite high. Again, when we think about existing scalable programs, NICA is about all we could think of right off the top. And this is something that we need to examine in more depth. When we think about the progression to the next phase, to those really highly competitive athletes, we think that only about 10 to 20% are going to move forward. But we really want to retain 100% of the athletes at this point. We either want them to continue being competitive in racing and having fun in the sport, or we want to have them move to that active for life stage where they're going to really thrive and be engaged with our sport. If we look at the numbers, just a very rough guide, we're looking at a lot of kids moving through. 30 to 60,000 kids per year remaining at this regional or active for life phase, and maybe as many as 10 to 15,000 moving through to high performance. So quite a few kids can move forward at the national level. When we think about the qualities of those riders that are progressing, it's really still based on the persistence of the athlete. But they need to have some other components. They need to have requisite physicality in order to be able to really be competitive and move forward. And they have to have the skill set. Without the skill set, they're going to have a lot of difficulty. They have to have a growth mindset. They have to be humble. They have to know that there's a lot of work ahead of them, that they're just part way into this sport. And they have to have a good work ethic to go with that. So when we talk about that high performance stage, the goals here, the key goal is we want to graduate all of these kids into developmental elite teams, professional racing, and even going into college. Ultimately, we believe that these athletes are going to become your support staff. They're going to become the directors, mechanics, bike fitters. They're going to permeate throughout the industry. And we want them to have a firm grasp on the sport. It's absolutely important. These are your future leaders of our sport, and they're going to be the mentors, coaches, and directors for your clubs and teams. Ultimately, we want them to stay in the sport. We don't want them to leave. They need to understand that the success of their teammates, of their peers, is shared. They are vital to the growth of the sport. They're vital to the success of all athletes in our country. Merely through the competition and having quality competition, it's going to raise the bar for all athletics in the United States. And it should be done at home. We had a lot of discussion about the equipment consideration. Ultimately, it comes down to the functionality of the bicycle as opposed to the cost. The hope is that a lot of these riders are now going to have access to equipment through the teams they ride for, though we really still need to think about secondhand bicycles and loaner bicycles and things being transferred down, recycled down from professional organizations into these riderships. When we think about the programs, there was a lot of discussion about this. It is unclear as to what level the riders should be racing at. In an ideal situation, we want the riders at home. You want them at home most of the time and traveling relatively little. So that's 30 to 50% local, 20 to 30% regional, and then less so going national, international. However, unlike that previous category where they're just getting into competitive cycling, now the focus is really on those national, international competitions. Those local and regional opportunities, they're training tools. They allow these kids, well, young adults at this stage, really to play, to have opportunities to grow in the sport, try new things, help their teammates, learn how to work as a team. But ultimately, it's providing that preparation that they're going to need in the national and international arenas. It's also realized that in the United States, there's huge diversity in terms of what the availability of events. And so this is really going to factor into what those percentages mean. So who's running these programs? Again, a lot of discussion about this. We don't really understand the correct framework yet. It's something that we need to work on. We still had a lot of discussion about local, regional, national-oriented clubs and teams. Ideally, what we will see is that as the bar rises, is that the local clubs and teams are going to become much more relevant and they're going to have a lot more strength in their programs. And so they're going to actually be sending riders, sending teams into the national, international arenas, which we're not seeing so much right now. There's probably still going to be a lot of opportunities for composite team programs, which exist right now, as well as coach or private race trips. And of course, we're always going to have regional and national teams that have some sort of selection process associated with them. We've also had a lot of discussion about all-star programs, which provide opportunities across a region or even the nation to select riders to provide them new opportunities to move forward in the sport and grow. When we think about the types of events, again, it really comes down to the athlete first, that athlete-centered universe. The events that are selected have to be appropriate for the progression of the athlete. In this case, they're still going to be doing tons of local and regional racing and training. Those are training events now. And then those national and international events become the focus. However, as they move forward through the sport, they really need to build that idea of self-sufficiency and self-reliance. And so there has to be off-bike activities associated with whatever they're doing, such as learning how to be their own mechanic and working on their own bike. There also needs to be camp and clinic opportunities for them to move forward in the sport. Again, it comes around to that robust pyramid approach. When we think about the coaches and directors that are involved at this level, it needs to be elite level coaches and directors, even working with the local squads. They need to be thinking athlete-centered, and these directors and coaches really need to understand what their job entails and how to work not only with the athlete, but also how to prepare them to move forward into the national and international arena. Associated with that, there needs to be mentorship and apprenticeship opportunities for younger individuals to come in and learn what it takes to do the job. We currently don't have that in our sport. As far as we know, there is no coaching toolkit for this in the United States. This is something that needs to be developed. When we think about existing scalable programs, it's completely unclear as to what's available. What we do know is it comes around to the idea of having process-oriented programs that are built in a sustainable way. The second part, being sustainable, is a very high bar to achieve in our sport. We know this. But there are some models out there that we know to exist, such as the Amy D composite type programs, which have very low cost overheads relative to the opportunities they provide. But we also need to be looking at the different clubs and teams and looking not only at the processes, but we need to understand their budgets and the sustainability of those programs. And then we need to be looking at national team programs, and this isn't just in the United States, but across all nations, to see if there's anything that we can learn so that we can move forward. In terms of costs, again, this is something that we really need to work on. And a really good suggestion was that we need to develop worksheets so that we can provide cost breakdowns that we can provide to the parents across the different ADM levels. And that way, the parents will have a very good idea of what they're in for when their child gets involved with the sport. When we think about the funding considerations, and this goes across all the ADM levels, both for local clubs, teams, and even moving up the ladder, there needs to be high diversity in the funding structures. A lot of us get grants, we run events, We charge programming fees. The parents pay quite a bit, but you can also have alumni donor pools. There can be corporate donations. You can have pledge funds coming from much more advanced ridership, such as from World Tour riders, pledging money down to provincial riders in Canada. Clubs and teams really need to be thinking about themselves as 501c3s that can provide a backbone for donations. And then you have other types of ways of raising funds, such as Amazon Rewards. So the last piece of this is, what do those riders look like when they actually graduate from this level? Of course, they have to have they have to be physically capable of doing the work. They have to be able to race their bikes. They have to be able to get to the finish line. They have to be able to do it well. They have to have the appropriate skill set, but they also have to be very professional in their activities. They have to be confident in what they do. They have to be extremely persistent, just as when they came in. They have to have built that self-sufficiency. They have to have a growth mindset. They got to be adventurous, willing to learn and try new things still. They need to have a flow mindset. They got to be flexible, an ability to deal with the chaos in our sport. And then they have to be able to exist in a team sport atmosphere, which can be counterintuitive for the individualistic nature of a lot of cyclists. So I really want to thank you for going through this session, and please provide feedback on this. These are working documents, and we're still building them out and working towards the future. So be looking for an overview coming up very soon on this, where we'll combine all the different ADM levels and we'll put it together in a single conversation. And we'll have a nice discussion about that.